What's up, Rezlife students? It's Blake from Rezlife West, and we are here again for Sunday School. Today, talking about the book of Daniel. Today, we're specifically looking at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Did you ever watch VeggieTales growing up? Some of you might know this, but there's that whole story about the chocolate bunny episode. Man, I love that one. Fun fact about me. Growing up, I actually had a dog named Meshach. Here's a pic. Great dog. Loved him. But before we dig into the story, I want to recap for a second what it means to be countercultural. What does counterculture mean? When I don't know something, I look it up in the dictionary. I actually Google it, and I Googled counterculture, and this is what I found. Counterculture means a culture with values and customs that are very different from and usually opposed to those accepted by most of society. That's a little wordy. Counterculture can be a noun or it can be an adjective. So let's dig deeper for a second. So here's an example. Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks lived a countercultural life when she chose to not get off her seat on the bus. Society was telling her to give up her seat in the front, and she said no. She was a person that lived counterculturally. She lived differently. You could then say that something is counterculture. Students doing online school was a counterculture thing. Society says we typically do school in person, but the COVID pandemic kind of flipped that upside down. It was a different way that our culture was expecting to do school. Maybe you know some students or groups or organizations that have done things differently than the expected way. As followers of Jesus, we are called to live a countercultural life. And why? Because Jesus is the biggest countercultural person we can think of. Followers of Jesus chose to be countercultural not because they're stubborn, but because Jesus gave us an example of living differently in the world that promotes love, strength, and peace to everything. And the Bible is full of people that chose to live a countercultural life. And that's why we're looking at the book of Daniel. His story gives us a lot of examples on how to do this well. So if you have your Bibles, follow along with me in Daniel 3, verses 3 through 30. This is what it says. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue. It was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up in the Dura Valley in the province of Babylon. The herald proclaimed loudly, "Peoples, nations, and languages, this is what you must do. When you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, harp, flute, and every kind of instrument, you must bow down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Anyone who will not bow down and worship will be immediately thrown into a furnace of flaming fire." At that moment, some Chaldeans came forward, seizing a chance to attack the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. Now there are some Jews, ones you appointed to administer the province of Babylon, specifically Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have ignored your command. They don't serve your gods, and they don't worship the gold statue you've set up." In a violent rage, Nebuchadnezzar ordered them to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I've set up? If you are now ready to do so, bow down and worship the gold statue I've made when you hear the sound of horn, pipe, zither, lyre, harp, flute, and every kind of instrument. But if you won't worship it, you'll be thrown straight into the furnace of flaming fire. Then what God will rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered King Nebuchadnezzar, "We don't need to answer your question. If our God, the one we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of flaming fire and from your power, your majesty, then let him rescue us. But if he doesn't, know this for certain, your majesty, we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up." So let's pause for a second. There is this king, King Nebuchadnezzar, who builds this idol, and he tells everyone to worship it, or else they're going to be thrown into a furnace. And 3 people say no to worshiping it. Those 3 are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The 3 guys were Jewish, and they were devoted to only worshiping God, but King Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to worship something else. They even tell King Nebuchadnezzar, "Look, we believe so strongly that our God is going to protect us if we are thrown into the fire. And if we burn, then I guess we're wrong. But we're pretty positive that this is gonna work out. These 3 people had a lot of courage to live into their beliefs and not give in to what the government, this king, was telling them. And these people went against the norm and lived differently compared to how they were told to live. Have you ever stood up for something so strongly or stood up for what you believed in? Like I mentioned earlier, Rosa Parks is one example. In your small group time, Google other people in the world that have stood up for what they believed in. The list is long, and our world has been impacted positively by so many people standing up for what they believe in. Standing up for what you believe in, it takes courage and the ability to be bold. And it's a lot of courageous and bold people that have changed the course of history again and again. And Daniel wasn't the first person to do this. He also wasn't the last. All right, so what happens next in the story? Well, they're thrown into this furnace. But it isn't what you think. This is what it says in verse 23. So these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of flaming fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in shock and said to his associates, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire?" And they answered the king, "Certainly, your majesty." But he replied, "Look, I see 4 men unbound walking around inside the fire, and they aren't hurt. And the 4th one looks like one of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar went near the opening of the furnace of flaming fire and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. The chief administrators, ministers, governors, and the king's associates crowded around and looked at them. The fire hadn't done anything to him. Their hair wasn't singed. Their garments looked the same as before. They didn't even smell like fire. So Nebuchadnezzar throws these 3 people in the furnace, and they don't die. They come out untouched. We hear how those around them were completely shocked. Imagine being one of them. But what we know from this is that their faith saved them. And it is because they chose to live counterculturally. This story, it's about resistance, boldness, and faith. The 3 people resisted. They pushed back against what someone was telling them to do. They were bold in the way they stood up for what they believed in. And they had faith that God was going to provide for them, no matter what was going to happen next. It takes guts to stand up for what we believe in. Have you ever been in a situation where you saw someone hurt or upset by words or actions, and you thought maybe in your head, that just doesn't seem right? It's in those moments that God might be calling us to live counterculturally. Students, may you be reminded that God is always there with us. And standing up for what's right, even in the face of certain death like these 3 people, refusing to back down for what you believe in, having courage even when scared. This is what living counterculturally looks like. Can you think of some situations in your life where maybe you had the opportunities to live counterculturally? Maybe you recognize the moments God might be calling you to live counterculturally and to have a positive impact on people around you. Students, that is our challenge this week, to live counterculturally in this world.